Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's video is about ways to arrange our mix. In the old days, mixes used to be relatively small, as in not too many tracks. When you had an 8-track mixer, you really weren't likely to have more than 8 channels of things that needed mixing. If you did, then you had to work in what was called submixers. So you'd have to mix a thing, bounce it down to tape, then have the guys come in and do the other bits on the remaining 7 tracks. But there was still a limit as to how big your mix was going to be, and at any given stage you probably weren't handling more than at least the number of things that you could have on your board or on your tape. So 8, 16, 24, 48. There were probably consoles that got up to 96, but they would have been relatively rare. But these days, large mixes of, as in lots and lots of tracks being sent over, are not too uncommon. This one that I'm going to use to show you this technique is actually a smaller one from this particular client. He commonly gives me 70, 80. Apparently there's one in the album that I'm doing for him at the moment that's 190 something tracks. That's going to be fun. But thankfully in his case, he's always super organized. So don't allow your, little side step here, don't allow your tracks, if you're going to have many of them, to become messy. There's nothing worse than being sent 48 tracks of one vocal. It's not my job to comp. Or if it is, make sure I know it's my job to comp. Don't just send me garbage. So when you're doing something, make sure, and this client is excellent at making sure that everything is going to add value. Sometimes I question whether it's going to add value, and then once I get it in, it's like, yep, good call. So we'll quickly show you some of what I'm doing. This is not a full mix. I've only got to the end of the rhythm section. We've got quite a lot of material. As I said, this is a small one for this client. May have lost a track, or it may just have not been there in the first place. But as we get lots of tracks into our mixing desk, we've got the left-right issue. By the time we've got up to 70 or 80, it can start to get complex. Now, I've been a big fan of using buses for quite some time now. I first started using them for the ability to process things together in a bus, and then started to realize more and more, wow, they're a super easy way of helping to organize things. Organization helps tremendously, especially once you're getting into doing big mixes, because if not, you can lose things. Matter of fact, with this client, we got to the end of a mix today with a 78 or 79 track song. And by the time I'd got to there, and unfortunately we'd had to have a couple of weeks off in the middle, as you note, I had a cold. Ears didn't even work properly. There were some bits that were missed, I'd forgotten about, and it wasn't easy to see. It wasn't like you could just go down and say, oh yeah, we've got John in the mix, we got Paul in the mix, we got George in the mix, we got Ringo in the mix, we've got Yoko muted, we're done. With that many tracks, it's possible to kind of lose things. You have them there when you're working on them, but then as you've got all these other layers, you can lose them. So organization is super important. I don't normally color code things, but I thought this time, I was looking at being more organized overall, and normally I'm very organized, what if I color coded them? So I'm not saying whether this is a good or bad idea. I see some people do it, but I thought, well, okay. So as usual, when setting up the mix, I put things into buses. So my drums and bass go into my rhythm bus. My melodic instruments are going into a melodic bus. If I had more guitars, I'd probably have a guitar bus. There are some sound effects, go into a bus. You'll see this time round, I've actually color-coded the buses. Normally I just go with, yeah, whatever color, that's fine. Vocals going into a vocal bus. With a lot of these clients' larger work, there are often several different vocalists, and a song commonly has 3 or 4 vocalists, so each verse might have a separate vocalist. So there I probably put the leads into a bus. Here's what I then do. Traditionally, I've just done the usual thing. My buses then go to the masters. And if I need to adjust something on the bus, then I come and adjust the bus. That's great. Some people call that using the volume control here to handle all of these at once. VCA, quite where that came from, don't know, don't really care, but a bus can be used to jam things, several signals into one slot so that you can process them together, or the same several signals into one slot so that you can volume them up and down together. Don't care what you want to call it, it's a bus. I then thought, and I was in the shower when I thought this, when I'm thinking, Reason doesn't have folders, or when I've got so many things and it's hard to shuttle from one end to another and hard to manage them all in one go, because it's hard to keep them in sight. It suddenly dawned on me, buses, Reason's brilliant for buses, you can bus everything to everything, is that I could then create a duplicate of each of these buses. So, if I were to create a new bus, let's say I was to say these guitars are worthy of a bus. I don't know whether they are because I haven't started mixing them yet. I can simply go to Route 2, New Output Bus. If you're using a different DAW, this concept still works. Just work out how you do your own DAWification. Now, I'm going to colour this bright yellow so it's easy for me to find and get rid of. Bus 1. So now I can handle all my guitars here. What I'm now thinking is probably a great solution is to create another bus straight away. So these guys go to, silly, is to send this to a new bus. Forgive me whilst brain's a little fried. Now this, guitars are going to this bus, and guitars. You'll see I put that in caps, and I put this in just normal lettering. Up to you how you do it, but again, just one of those ways of being arranged, because when we come to look in possible things, we can see the master ones are encapitulated. So now I can drag this, because this has to go to the master section, down to the other end. And bing, guitars. So now my guitars go to a bus on their own, and if I'm thinking I need more or less guitars, so all the advantages of a normal, actually I might keep them seeing I've made them, all the advantages of what you would normally do with a bus, but the idea of taking a master bus of each of these and then putting them over here, it was like one of those, why didn't I think about it before moments? What led me to here was one of my regular questions, is like, how would they have done that in days of yore? And it is quite simple. Those massive mixing desks where they were getting 48, 96 channels, what have you, they would have all your channels down one side, commonly on the left-hand side, all these loose channels, all these guys here, all the vocal channels and the drum channels and what have you. And then, they did go to buses. And over on the right-hand side, where you'd always had your reverb returns, so your effect returns would be in a section, and then there would often be another section, which were funny-looking channels. Sometimes they didn't have all of the nobulation that you would have on a normal channel. Sometimes they did, but sometimes they were funny-looking channels. And when I was young, I often wondered what they were for, and eventually I learnt that those were buses for doing exactly what I'm showing here, that you could send groups of things which were musically relevant, so like modules, the module that contains the vocals, the module that contains the guitars, and shuttle them off to the end, so you could do all your preparation of each of your individual tracks up here, balance up the way it seemed really right within your bus and section here. You don't play with your bus necessarily here at all. And then when you're coming to balance up your whole mix, rather than working with 96 tracks, which is really hard to balance, you're sort of going, where's that? You come up to here and go, too much guitars, not enough guitars. Not enough guitars. There we go. And the balance of your guitars will be basically right, because the more you mix, the more you learn how things go together. If they're not right, well, it's not too bad, because you simply go back here and go, oh, guitars, and you can adjust this one a little bit. And that's it. But you'll find you need to do less and less of that, so you can do your mix over here. And I know for many of you might be like, big deal. Yeah, fair enough, big deal. But rather than thinking, oh, it can't be done because we don't have folders, yes, it can be done, and it can be done extremely elegantly with that, because most systems have some kind of bus option these days. Sometimes they hide them under funny names like VCAs or other kinds of weird names for bus channels. Not sends, because sends are different, although I've noticed some doors still use a send system. I don't fully agree with that, but whatever floats their boat. The way it looks on the inside, okay, obviously our mixer, just so you can see, I tend not to have these open. I don't feel the need to see them that way. I love the fact that it is there and that you don't need to go getting channel strips as VSTs, because everything's already there. But when I'm doing my EQing, then I will do it visually here. So let's say here, I can do it visually here. So having to have, where is it? This guy open and twiddle like that kind of doesn't really do it for me, but I like that it's there. I've actually stunned when I've gone into other doors, expensive doors, and most of them don't have this channel strip stuff. So you don't have basic dynamics EQ on board already. And you're kind of like, how can you give people a mixing desk without it being a mixing desk? And that's why the sudden rise of channel strips. And look, the concept is good, don't get me wrong. But I still find it so much easier here, because I don't have to go, oh, gee, I've got to remember to insert a reverb, insert an EQ, because it's already there on the desk. If I want a different EQ, yeah, I can insert it. But that's an insert. I've still got my desk EQ there ready to go. So again, nice and simple, right up the end. You can have your master module faders. So we can fade the module, which is the rhythm section. We can fade the module, which is the guitars. Fade the module, which is the vocals. Inside the rack, as usual, I arrange everything before I start a mix. Before I mix anything, this is all part of helping me listen to what's there. I go through the material. Again, this client is super good. He brings it super organized, and he actually tends to bring it the way that I mix it. He knows the way that I'm going to arrange stuff. He sends it to me that way. Can't get much better than that. I've got another client who actually has a numbering system. So drums are 1 through. Then I think his bass starts at 20, and then his guitars start at 30. That's brilliant. So I don't get consecutive numbers, but there's a clear sense of organization in each of the mixes, and he sends over with a template, the same information every single time. It's so nice. He's not winging it, and boy, is his material stunning. It's really great. So I organize things, and this is a personal choice, but with reason. I love the way that we've got these racks, so I can put each of my sections. We can see our guitar thing here. I've got my drums, which sometimes go to a drum bus, sometimes not. They're coming to the rhythm bus. Now we know that rhythm bus is going off to the master rhythm bus, which is here. We'll come back to that in a mo. We've got melodic instruments, guitars. I've decided to send that out, in which case I actually need to drag this across here. So that goes there. So I've now got several different places in which I can assess my mix, and again we'll come back to that. My sound effects, and then my vocals. All at the end of these, there is a bus. So if I decide I want to process my vocals all together, I can drag in something to do that. And I will, because it's rare that a bus goes by without something on it. It's just like being cancelled. Over here, this is new from Red Rock, reference 5. It's a freebie, and it's probably one of my favourite of all freebies. There's the crossfader. I use that all the time for things. Not for crossfading in a DJ way, but to mix things. I use that all the time. This guy's going in every single mix. The only thing that I would ask for as extra is just a little tape underneath for me to be able to type what's there on each knob or each button, but it's neither here nor there because I'm organized. So number 1 is the mix that I'm making. Number 2 is his mix. Sorry, that was probably a bit loud. To do that really well, I do change how this works. So I use my control room out to input 1, this track out to input 2. You may have noticed in the mixer that this track shows itself as having no output, and that's correct because it sort of doesn't, and then that's going out to the masters. So when I come to master off, yes, it's going through this box, but this box is not adding any noise, yay digital. The reason that I am using, and somebody else had to remind me of this, thank you to the person who actually reminded me of this feature. I was being a little upset because it was hard to hear my reverbs separately, because Reason doesn't have a solo in place or solo for a reverb send that will let me, but of course it does. You've got listen to. If you watch. Sorry, let's go back to working in several places at once. If I can listen to my reverb, I can listen to my other reverb. There's no problem with doing this so long as your masters are where they should be when you come to export, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be. If you're exporting without your masters at 0 dB, something is wrong. So even if I've got this automated, to turn the volume down at the end of the track, nice little fade, thank you for coming, it'll still be back at 0 dB when I start up. Unless there's automation, but that's a whole other story. You've still got 0 dB. So there's nothing wrong with using your control room output as your master output. The master output is plugged into the sample input in this case, because if I want to sample something, it'll just sample what I'm hearing. So the advantages of here is that I can, let's just turn this down to be a little kinder. Here's my mix, it's great. If you want the world, then I can flip across and check it. Now if I'm going, yeah, okay, but I don't think I've got enough guitars, let's say. I'm not showing you the other stuff. Oh, yep, that's right. So it makes it far quicker to do any of those little checks, references. Not that I've spent time copying other people's mixes, but if somebody has given me a reasonable mix and they're showing their ideas, yeah, it's important to check that and see, am I getting that right? If I were to slavishly follow people's mixes, there'd be no point in them having me mix it, because you hire someone to mix your stuff, A, hopefully to get a better mix, but B, for their creative input. I've said this before, and I know that not everyone agrees. Some people think that you're supposed to just make a perfect version of their very, very flawed mix, but that's still just going to be a very flawed mix. Maybe a shiny flawed mix, but it'll still be a flawed mix. So it's a nice outcome of this, that with all of these things here, I've got a very easy way to mix. And of course, back in the mixer as well. If you've stuck with me this long, I'll give you a couple of unrelated but rather cool tips. I appreciate the people who stick with me. Let's the snare sounds like pasting clag onto a piece of cardboard. Yay, samples. But snares aren't the nicest sounding things in the real world. Boys and girls, there is more. This is one of my own devices. And left to my own devices, I probably will. Sorry, Pet Shop Boys joke. If you don't get it, you should. There are two reasons why this adds so much punch to that snare. The snare is very typical of a process sample. One of the problems with process samples is that they are somewhat lifeless. You get a real drum set in a real room, nice recording of it. A great example of this is the Lewitt microphones, the competition for, or the open mix for St. Agnes, Move Like a Ghost. There's everything in everything on that, and that's a great example of a real live room recording. And the drums sound very different in that from Stephen Slate or whatever, because those Easy Drums, Stephen Slate, Superior, all of those things, they're very, very processed, and you don't realize how processed they are. They try and resolve it by pretending to give you room reverb and what have you, but it's doohickery trickery. If you can get a great sound, good on you, but it's not like a real room. Now, that flat, papery snare sound is just not rock and roll. It's not pleasing. So we need to get some into it. Two stages of what is happening here. Actually, that's going to go to 100. Sorry, just forgive me whilst I turn those to 0, because we, as I said, have two stages. Let's just solo this fella. There is reverb on coming from here, like my reverb sends and what have you, but they can stay. Inserted this wee fella. This is a very simple device. There's a whole video on it. Go look it up for the space case, space reverb. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 taps, hardwired as stereo, and then a 9th tap, which is mono. Yay. I like mono. Mono is brilliant. And that's an actual echo delay. These ones are all short. So you can hear what they're really doing. You get them short, and you can create a really nice plate chamber room type thing. So these are set up. None of these are quite the same timing in their left-right pairs. They're quite a bit offset in some of them. And the first set is a little lower. No, not early reflections. It's just that some rooms bloom. And that's a little like pre-delay. So you create your reverb and then have so many milliseconds before the reverb itself actually starts. So drum hit, reverb. That little bit of silence in the middle actually helps give clarity and a lot more to that reverb. There is also the kind of room shape called a bloom, or at least it always used to be called a bloom. I've spoken this a few times because I love blooms. In that if your reverb comes in and expands, if you're using RV7000 room 4, blooms. Not as bloomy as I'd like it to be, but it blooms. You see that starts like this before it. So creating a little bit of bloom here. And you can hear that as there's a sense of crack, and that's your bloom. That's given us a lot more than we had. See how there's suddenly a lot more body inside that sound. The next step is actually this. Now, these reverbs were designed mostly for reason, but really for any DAW with good modulation capabilities. And I've discovered that Reaper has a basic modulation built in. Kind of cool, kind of clunky, but kind of cool. Good on them for finally doing it. Let me get excitable with this. Now, on its own, it kind of sounds terrible. That's creating some thickness in the reverb, but within the... Hear how that suddenly fills in the probably, I don't know, 400 or whatever? It suddenly thickens up that sound. As well as the fact that we do have a little bit of flangy, chorusy, whatever going on. With that, it also gives us the fact that I'm deliberately never running with tempo sync on delays, reverbs, almost everything. It's rare that I actually lock things to tempo sync. So it means that each snare hit, seeing their samples are really probably the same or close enough to the same. Thank you, Ping. They sound very sampley. So this is a way of having each snare hit a little bit different because our time wobble is in a different place for each one. So it's a little like your drummer. I'll hit the drum here, I'll hit the drum there, which is what they do. Even the really tidy ones, like Mr. Rolling Stones, he's still not going to be hitting that drum in exactly the same point, which means that each snare hit's a little bit different. So this is making it richer because we're throwing some lower end stuff in from the that comes from moving delay lines in time. But it also means that that snare is slightly different each time, which makes it more exciting. Therefore, 2 reasons, it sounds richer. Now, the second one is that I've got a couple of the taps. I sometimes use whatever I've taken as the loudest tap, whether it be the first one or the second one or whatever. Sometimes I'll do all of the taps, but it's probably not necessary, but you can get a nice sound, especially with very long times, because this is designed so with the super long times, which don't suit this piece, modulating all of these taps can really help turn it into a reverb more than a bunch of clicks. So these, they're going opposite directions, and that's creating more stereo. So listen to... As we do that, we actually get a little bit more stereo. It's very easy to think that you only create your sound with the sound, but you can create a lot of the sound. You can change its tone, its timbre, its texture through reverb and delay. So here we're creating this stereo that comes after the sound, but we perceive it as being part of the sound. We now feel like we've got this great big nice snare, I don't know, maple or something or other. We're getting emotive about our snare, and that's good. It's got this nice body and it's full, and it's got this good rock thing going on. Pretty impressive from... So we don't always do everything that we think we're going to do. There's my EQing of said sound. So we've got this rather explosive sound. Now, part of the reason that it's explosive is because we've got this reverb that's whoa, and it's got that bloom in it, so that we can hear the reverb rise, or more to the point, we feel the reverb rise after. So that gives us a sense of size. But it's going into my drum bus, which uses this guy, which I like a lot. Notice how that's kind of flat still. Yes, this is adding a little bit of level, but not too much. I just accept that it's the nature of this guy. It almost always adds level, but it doesn't bother me. But listen to the feel of the submix more than just the level. Without. So what that's doing is it's gluing everything together, but more important, it's grooving everything together. I'm just going through that with the client, sort of showing him again the concept of compression to be used as a glue or a groove. And he said, well, why don't they call it, groove compression? It's like, because everybody wants to call it glue and most people don't want to compress for groove. So I showed him the concept of, and it won't work very well here. This isn't the best compressor for doing that, but it's perfect for this sort of thing. But I got the whole piece, it was the beginning of the master, put in the M-class compressor, which was designed for this, set it to infinite, set the threshold right down to low, so it was like just hammered. But that's not the thing, you're not listening for that, you're just moving the attack and release point until suddenly... And I'm watching him, and suddenly he starts going. It's like, that's it. This is what we're doing here. We're taking the energy from the kit and the energy from the bass, and we're pushing them together and making them work together. Which means that as the thump from the kick comes in, normally at hopefully the same time as the bass, then they're going to push each other down, which is the equivalent of us hearing a loud sound and go. So that's why we get this great groove. Now our snare contains this reverb. Because the reverb's already there, it gets crushed as well. Like, it gets turned down in level. I shouldn't say crushed, because crushed gives the impression that we're brutalizing it. We're not brutalizing at all. We're creating groove, but it gets pulled into the groove as well. So as it smacks, the level comes up of that reverb, especially as it blooms, just to get hit with the compressor. So it comes up, and which gives us an even greater feeling of that it's an enormous sound, because we're using the psychology of ears and brains, that our ears and brains compress. When something's loud, we actually compress it. When there's too much going on, we compress the information that we are receiving. Our brains do that all the time. We can't actually process the bandwidth we're receiving. We compress it and throw most of it out. Some of it gets remembered in dreams. Some of it's just gone. Not relevant. Most of what our wives say, not relevant. No, not at all. Don't be like that. Don't be like that at all. But there's a lot of information we throw away. And so this mimics that human brain's process. So we're using these tools to mimic the brain's process. And now we've gone from... If we bypass that and this, nice, but not really not really rock and roll. It's not the Cult. To having this nice big rock and roll feel. And that's been before we've got the guitars. So, bonus tip, as I said, I like to reward those who take the time and trouble to stick with it. Remember, the overview was that we can take our buses and then send those buses to another bus. And then we can create our own module mix. So it's an overview mix. So I can mix all my drums. Here. I can solo them. All the usual things. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could get into panning them, but that probably should have been done before now. And there's a little bit of panning in here as well, which is very deliberate. So this is a wonderful way of going around that thing that, oh, we need folders. We don't need folders. All we need to do is think about how we can solve that problem. And this is exactly the same way that it was solved back in the 80s and 90s when we started to have consoles bigger than we could actually work. You know, you have to cut your lunch to get to the other end of the console. So you do all your work down there, which is on these individual tracks here, preparing all your sections and getting them sounding great. And then after lunch, trundle up this side, which is where you get to these. And then you balance up your mix. And the better you get at doing it that way, the less you'll need to go back into any of these things. You will notice that I do very little in solo. I've talked about this before, and I will talk about it over and over because I see a lot of times people making sounds in solo. It's going to kill you. I'm building the rhythm track first in this case. I just decided that was the way I want to go. That's what what grabbed me when I started listening to it. I was like, oh, isn't that cool? So rather than muting these, I merely took all of these, and it doesn't work here actually. I've just realized that little feature does not work. Don't know whether it's deliberate, but grabbing lots of things and moving them at once. Rather than putting them down and saying, okay, I'll go like this, which is dangerous because you make the world's biggest drum kit, which won't fit in any mix at all. I'll pull these down halfway or whatever. So they're still audible. I still have all my mix there. They're things that I haven't touched, but I can hear them in context. So if I know, well, I do know, it's not if, I do know what is in this mix all the time. Even though I can barely hear these vocals, they need a good little bit of to make them happen. But I can still feel them underneath everything. So as I'm making my decisions in this section, I'm still aware of what's happening in the other sections. And when it comes to working on the guitars, I may well do this. So it allows me to hear the guitars like they're in solo, but I've still got a good reference of how they fit inside the mix. That's one of the really nice advantages of this kind of bus mixing. I've been doing that for a while, but going through and changing the bus levels here, actually not as elegant as just scooting over here and changing the bus levels, or if I'm in the rack of changing my bus levels here. I just can't do the shift click thing and drag several faders, but nonetheless, none of this is about being exact. It's just about saying, okay, I'll still have them just audible, so they're still there in my consciousness as I am preparing this. So, don't need folders, just need to think about using the bus system, which is very nicely implemented here, and then you've got a lot more power as your mixes get bigger. Any questions? Down below. If you're looking to hire me for something, down below, or track me down on Facebook, send me a message in Messenger. If I haven't responded straight away, because sometimes Messenger requests just evaporate, the Messenger sits there, but I just don't get pinged to say that it's there, then just follow up in some other way. You have a good day now.